If I hadn't cut through that chain when I did, half the neighborhood would have gone up in smoke, all because someone decided my gait offended the neighborhood's visual standards. That sentence still plays on repeat in my head, especially now standing at the edge of my property, watching a fire truck refill its tank from the emergency valve buried 10 feet in from the fence line, the same valve that was blocked off just 48 hours ago by a steel chain, a shiny new padlock, and a woman who believed HOA regulations were a matter of life and death, mostly mine. The fire crew works fast. They always do. No small talk, no fuss, just muscle memory and sweat. One of them nods at me, a little too knowingly. Before shutting the valve and giving the all clear, they roll out, sirens off, dust kicking up behind the tires like nothing ever happened. But something did happen. Something that started with a clipboard and ended with me yanking a gate open using a winch and more spite than horsepower. And no, I'm not proud of the way it went down. But I do it again. I will do it again if someone tries to lock that gate a second time. The lock, what's left of it, now hangs on a nail beside my porch, twisted metal still attached to a bit of the chain, like a museum piece. I made a sign for it. Warning, improper use may cause wildfires. Tourists think it's a joke. The fire chief didn't. It all started 2 mornings ago on a Monday. You know the kind, birds chirping, coffee brewing, and my dog Jake doing his usual patrol of the fence line like a retired security guard with something to prove. I was midway through replacing a warped plank on the chicken coop when I saw her, marching down the gravel easement like she'd been summoned by divine ordinance. Big sunglasses, bigger attitude, Karen, no last name needed, just Karen. I didn't think much of it until she reached my front gate, looked around like she was casing a bank, and pulled something silver from her oversized purse. Before I could even get my gloves off, she looped a chain around the posts, snapped a padlock shut, and turned on her heel like she'd just claimed the land for Portugal. I stood there with a hammer in one hand, utterly confused. My dog barked once. I wish I had taken that as a sign. Because if I had known what was coming, the fire, the press, the hearing, I'd have cut that chain right then and there. It wasn't the first time Karen had shown up uninvited, but it was the first time she brought hardware. She came striding down the path like she owned it, which she didn't, wearing those bug-eyed sunglasses that made her look like an insect villain from a low-budget sci-fi movie. Her shoes clicked against the gravel like they were on a mission, and clutched in her left hand was the HOA's sacred artifact, the clipboard. Worn edges, color-coded tabs, and enough printed regulations to choke a filing cabinet. I watched from across the yard, hammer still in hand, trying to decide if this was one of those pretend not to notice moments or a dear God, what now kind of day. She made that choice for me. Karen reached the gate, paused like she was expecting fanfare, then very deliberately pulled out a length of polished steel chain and a brand new padlock. I squinted, confused. She didn't even hesitate. Wrapped the chain through both sides of the gate, snapped the lock in place, then gave it a tug, like she'd just secured the perimeter of Fort Knox. "Hey," I called, jogging toward her as dust kicked up around my boots. "Did you just lock my gate?" She didn't even flinch. "Yes," she replied in that high tone. I've practiced this in the mirror voice. "Per HOA Regulation 12C, all unapproved external structures must remain both locked and compliant with community visibility standards." I blinked. "It's not an external structure, it's my private access gate, on a private easement." She smiled like I just told her I believed the moon landing was fake. Visible from the trail equals community facing. It's disruptive to the aesthetic of our block. There it was, the aesthetic. Karen's favorite word, usually wielded like a weapon right before someone gets fined for painting their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. I looked at the padlock. Shiny, heavy duty. The kind of thing you buy when you want to make a point, not secure anything meaningful. "You submitted complaints about my gate?" I asked. She nodded, pleased with herself. 3, actually, all unanswered, so I took action. I glanced at the clipboard clutched in her arm, like a holy relic. You can't just chain off private property. On the contrary, she said, flipping a page and tapping something with her fingernail. According to subsection F, I didn't hear the rest. I was already walking away, not out of surrender, just to get my truck keys. I had a bad feeling this was only the opening move in a very dumb game I hadn't asked to play. And Karen? She came to win. I thought maybe she'd walk away after locking the gate. You know, mission accomplished, villain monologue delivered. Time to vanish in a cloud of passive-aggressive smugness. But no. Karen, in her infinite dedication to absurdity, walked the 10 steps back to her driveway, returned with a collapsible lawn chair, and set it up on the edge of her property, facing my now chained gate like she was guarding the tomb of the unknown aesthetic offense. She plopped down, unfolded a small sun hat, and cracked open a bottle of kombucha like it was her afternoon reward for a battle well fought. I stood on my porch dumbfounded, not angry yet, just trying to compute what kind of person willingly spends their Monday afternoon staring at a padlocked fence like it might try to escape if left unsupervised. Jake barked once from beside me, tail stiff, ears up. Even he knew something wasn't right. For the next 4 hours, Karen didn't move, didn't blink, didn't flinch. She just sipped, stared, and scribbled in her clipboard like she was conducting surveillance on a high-risk target. The Amazon delivery guy came by around 3. I watched him slow down, confused, then visibly recoil as Karen stood up, arms outstretched, directing him toward the back alley entrance. An alley that doesn't exist. She even tried to scan his package number for unauthorized drop zone verification. He got back in his van and drove off like he was fleeing the scene of a haunting. I considered calling the HOA myself just to see if there was a complaint hotline for this, but I already knew what I'd hear. If the gate is visible from the trail, it falls under Karen's jurisdiction. At least that's how she saw it. By sundown, the temperature had hit triple digits, and my porch thermometer had given up and just displayed LOL. The local news had started issuing fire danger alerts, and I could smell dry pine in the air. I figured, worst case, she'd get bored, pack up her clipboard and kombucha and go home. I was wrong. Again. That night, lightning struck somewhere out on the eastern ridge. Dry brush lit up like tissue paper. I saw the glow from my upstairs window before I even smelled the smoke, and all I could think about, all I could see in my head was that chain, that lock, that chair, and the woman who thought matching fences were more important than fire access. The thing is, I could have taken the chain off that same morning. I could have pulled out my bolt cutters, yanked it loose with the ATV, or just called the sheriff to get it removed. I had options. Karen wasn't exactly packing the legal authority of a court order, more like the confidence of a substitute hall monitor on a power trip. But I didn't cut it. And not because I was afraid of her. Please. Karen has the body mass of a garden rake and the intimidation factor of a mildly annoyed librarian. No, I didn't cut it because I knew exactly what lay 10 feet behind that gate, and I needed to be sure before I did anything that might make things worse. Buried under a square of gravel, hidden beneath a rust-covered metal hatch, sits a valve. Not just any valve. The valve. The main access point to our town's emergency reserve water system. Quiet, unassuming, but absolutely vital. It was installed after the 2017 flood, when our main water line failed for 3 days and turned a third of the town into a temporary refugee zone. The county brought in engineers, disaster consultants, even FEMA, and they contracted a handful of locals to assist with terrain surveying and logistics. One of those locals? Me. I know that system like the back of my hand. Every valve, every elevation grade, every manual shutoff. I helped bury the lines. I helped weld the casings. I helped dig the damn trench that feeds the secondary tank behind the ridge. And that gate, the one Karen decided needed more visual harmony, that gate is the only quick access route for emergency crews during fire season. The valve lies just beyond it, tucked behind the tree line. Impossible to see from the trail unless you know exactly what you're looking for, which Karen didn't or worse, did, and chose to ignore. I stood at the gate that evening, arms crossed, eyes on the padlock glinting in the setting sun. My fingers itched. Not with anger, with instinct, the kind of feeling you get when something's about to go sideways, and there's nothing you can do but wait for the crash. I looked down the road where the trail bent into the trees. Nothing yet, but the air smelled dry, charged, like the wind was holding his breath. Karen, still camped out in her plastic throne, didn't even look up. She just turned a page on her clipboard, totally unaware she'd just blocked off the one valve the fire department had used 3 summers in a row. And I had a sinking feeling they'd need it again. Soon. It started with a flash, so bright it lit up the upstairs hallway, like someone had flicked on every light in the house at once. Then came the silence, that eerie moment where the whole world pauses, like the sky itself is inhaling. Then the crack, a sound so deep it rattled my teeth, followed by a low rumble that seemed to crawl under the floorboards and settle somewhere behind my ribs. Jake barked once, bolted to the window, and let out a growl I'd only ever heard once before, the day a coyote tried to hop the back fence. I followed his gaze. Out past the tree line just beyond the eastern ridge, a bloom of orange flickered into life. Tiny at first, like someone lit a match and forgot to blow it out. But it grew fast. Too fast. Within minutes, I could see it reflecting off the low clouds like an angry halo. I grabbed my phone and pulled up the regional fire map. Sure enough, the system was already pinging. Lightning strike confirmed. Winds out of the southeast direction. West, straight toward us. I didn't waste time. Boots on. Grab bag by the door. I texted a neighbor up the road to see if anyone had called it in yet. They had, but the fire crews were already being dispatched from across the county. It was going to take time. Too much time. The valve, the gate, the chain. Suddenly, I was sprinting. I could already hear the faint wail of sirens in the distance. Not close, but closing in. They'd be coming down the trail, just like they always did. Fastest route to the emergency valve. GPS would take them right to it, and right to the gate. I made it there just seconds before the first fire truck rounded the bend. Big, red, dust-covered, lights flashing in rhythm with the tension in my chest. And there she was, Karen. Same lawn chair, same posture, but now in a bathrobe. A white one tied neatly at the waist like she was about to walk into a spa, not a wildfire. She raised her wine glass in my direction. I couldn't believe it. She was still here. The fire truck skidded to a stop just before the chain link gate. One of the crew jumped out, helmet on, boots already wet with sweat. He looked at the lock, then at Karen. "We need access to that valve now." She didn't even look up. "This is private property," she said. "I can't authorize entry without proper HOA clearance." And just like that, I knew. The fire wasn't the real threat, it was the chain. The firefighter blinked like he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. "This is a registered emergency asset," he said, trying to keep it professional. "Ma'am, you're obstructing state response." Karen crossed her legs. "Then bring paperwork." I couldn't move for a second. Not because I was shocked. I wasn't, not really. Deep down, I think I knew this moment was coming the second I saw that clipboard 2 days ago. But I still hoped there was a line even she wouldn't cross. There wasn't. I turned and jogged back toward the shed, gravel spitting under my boots. My breath came in short bursts, heart pounding like a drumline. Behind me, the wind was starting to shift. Warm, fast, dry. The fire was close, closer than it should have been. I yanked open the shed door, grabbed the chain and tow hook from the wall, and bolted back out, ignoring Jake's barking from the porch. I didn't have time to explain. I barely had time to think. When I got back to the gate, 2 more firefighters had joined the first, now in heated conversation with Karen, who was quoting something from memory about property lines and structural harmonization. One of them was already on the radio, clearly escalating. "Stand back," I yelled. Nobody moved, so I didn't wait. I wrapped the chain around the base of the gate, hooked the other end to my truck's hitch, climbed into the driver's seat, and floored it. The sound the lock made when it snapped, that sharp metallic shriek, was the most satisfying noise I'd heard in years, like the universe itself said, finally. The gate flew open, the gravel exploded, and the truck skidded sideways as the chain whipped loose and clattered to the ground. Karen shrieked something about legal action. Nobody cared. The fire crew surged forward like water through a burst dam. One of them tossed her a bright yellow pamphlet, the kind they hand out when they don't have time to argue but still need to check a box. She caught it, stunned. In less than 5 minutes, they had the hoses hooked up, the valve open, and water pumping like salvation itself. The sound of it, roaring through pipes, blasting into the tank, was like thunder on pavement. The fire was contained within hours, but not before one home high up on the ridge was lost. The next day, I spent 6 hours giving statements to county officials and emergency reps. They were tense, efficient, all business. Karen, she was gone. But the chain, that mangled, half-burnt relic, still lay by the gate like a war trophy, and I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The morning after the fire felt like the town had collectively woken up with a hangover. Smoke still clung to the treetops like a stubborn ghost. The sky was tinted that strange yellow-gray that makes everything feel a little too quiet. And the air, it had that scorched earth tang that sticks to your clothes and your nerves. I wasn't expecting a parade, maybe a few nods at the gas station, a grunt of acknowledgement from the fire crew. What I wasn't expecting was a full-blown silence bomb at Rosie's Cafe. The second I walked through the door, every head turned. Forks paused mid-bite. Kids stopped spinning on the bar stools, even Rosie herself, usually unbothered by politics or wildfires, set down her coffee pot like it had personally betrayed her. "You the guy with the gate?" someone asked from the back. I gave a slow nod. Didn't realize locking a gate would turn into a town-wide scandal. An older woman near the counter crossed her arms. It wouldn't have if that woman hadn't padlocked the only access point to our emergency water system. Rosie piped up from behind the register. "Karen filed a complaint this morning. Said you destroyed HOA property. Sheriff already tossed it, but figured you should know." That got a few chuckles. A guy in overalls leaned in and whispered, "She's been calling herself the waterfront coordinator. Told my wife she had the right to inspect our hose for non-compliance." I blinked. "You serious?" "Oh, she had a clipboard." Apparently what I thought was a one-off tantrum had been the tip of a very long, very annoying iceberg. Over the next 2 hours, as my eggs went cold and my coffee refilled itself like magic, I heard story after story. Karen had been waging a quiet war, issuing citations for untrimmed hedges, unapproved patio chairs, and a basketball hoop that posed a visual disruption to neighborhood cohesion. People were mad. Not confused, not inconvenienced, mad. But until now, no one had dared push back. She filed more complaints in 3 months than the entire HOA board had in the past 5 years. And they just let her. The fire changed that. By lunchtime, the news had already made its way around town. The council was calling an emergency meeting. Rumor had it the mayor himself had personally requested I attend. His exact words, according to Rosie, "You're the only one who knows what that gate's really for, and we better get the truth out before she rewrites the narrative with glitter and passive-aggressive signage." Town hall looked different that night. The room was packed, people standing along the walls, perched on windowsills, even clustered outside the doors, straining to hear. I hadn't seen this many folks gathered since the 4th of July pie bake-off, but this wasn't about pastry pride. This was about fire and water and the lock that came between the two. Councilman Devers met me at the entrance, tall, serious, the kind of guy who always looks like he's one mildly bad decision away from a migraine. He shook my hand firmly. "You brought the documents?" I held up a tube in one hand and a folder in the other, blueprints and signed contracts from 2017 to now. He nodded. "Good. You'll go on after the mayor." When I stepped into the main chamber, it went quiet. Again. I was getting used to it, but it still made my skin itch, and there she was, front row center, clipboard in lap like a badge of office, Karen, dressed in a pristine white pantsuit like she was preparing to defend herself in court or start a skincare empire. She didn't look nervous. She looked prepared. Mayor Schultz opened the meeting with a dry, practiced voice. We're here to discuss the events surrounding Gate E17 and the wildfire emergency response. He glanced at me. Mr. Walker, if you would. I stepped forward, unrolled the blueprint across the table, and cleared my throat. Gate E17 isn't just a gate, it's the only direct access point to the Ridgeview emergency valve, the one tied to our town's backup water supply. Installed after the 2017 flood, registered with the county, GPS coded into fire department routing systems. I let that sink in. Murmurs rippled. Karen raised her hand a little too eagerly. "Excuse me," she said, voice syrupy, "but I was under the impression that gate was on private property and therefore subject to aesthetic compliance under the HOA charter." The mayor sighed. "Mrs. Travers, you'll have your chance to speak." I turned to her calmly. "You're right, it is private, mine, but it's also designated as critical emergency infrastructure, which legally overrides any HOA guidelines, including yours." Gasps, whispers. Someone in the back actually said, "Whoa." Karen didn't blink. "That information was never made available to homeowners. I was simply protecting the visual harmony of the community." Councilman Devers cut in sharp. "Visual harmony? Fire crews had to drive 17 miles around a mountain while a house burned. That's what you were protecting?" Karen opened her mouth again, but I wasn't done. I pulled a final sheet from my folder and laid it on the table. "Here's the email from 2018. The HOA was notified. The board acknowledged receipt and signed off on permanent unobstructed access." For the first time, Karen looked rattled, and the room shifted. I thought maybe, just maybe, that town hall would be the end of it. That after the public shaming, the blueprint drop, and the email that turned her whole argument into dust, Karen would retreat, lick her wounds, reorganize her flower pots, and find a quieter hobby like knitting rules into doilies. I underestimated her. The next morning, my mailbox looked like it had been personally targeted by a legal-themed blizzard. 4 thick envelopes, each bearing the proud insignia of the Homeowners Association, stuffed so tightly I had to pry them out with a screwdriver. I carried them to the kitchen like suspicious packages and opened them with the same caution I'd use on a malfunctioning toaster. Envelope 1, a fine, $800 for unauthorized demolition of HOA installed security infrastructure. Envelope 2, a cease and desist letter citing willful destruction of community property and vehicular aggression on shared land. Envelope 3, a formal accusation of creating an unsafe precedent for future emergency response behavior. Envelope 4, a summons to appear before the HOA's Emergency Conduct Review Panel. I didn't even know we had an Emergency Conduct Review Panel. It sounded like something Karen invented over a weekend with wine and Microsoft Word templates. Jake tilted his head from the kitchen doorway as I muttered a string of words I won't repeat here. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, sat down and read every page, slowly, carefully, and then I laughed, because it was obvious what this was, a smokescreen, an attempt to reframe the narrative before it solidified. Karen couldn't erase what happened at the gate, too many witnesses, too much proof, but she could try to bury it in official-sounding garbage. And the worst part? It almost worked. I knew most people wouldn't read past the headers. They'd see cease and desist, unsafe behavior, emergency conduct, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, I'd gone too far. If maybe the guy who pulled a gate off its hinges with a truck was the problem. That's how HOA wars are fought. Not with facts, but formatting. Not with truth, but tone. I stared at the final letter, the one calling me to a review hearing on Thursday at 6 p.m. sharp. Karen wasn't just striking back, she was trying to take back control, one signature at a time. But what she didn't know, what she never seemed to understand, is that I hadn't just brought a truck to this fight. I had the law, and I was just getting started. I called Darren that afternoon. He's not a lawyer technically. He's a paralegal who's been working in local land use and water rights for over a decade. We met years ago when I helped him install a gray water system at his off-grid cabin. In exchange, he promised me one free favor, involving documents, but not bodies. Seemed like the time to cash it in. He picked up on the first ring. "Let me guess," he said. "Karen?" "Like a cockroach in a power suit." "I'm in. Bring everything." An hour later, we were sitting at his cluttered desk, buried under a stack of HOA letters, blueprints, easement agreements, and a half-empty bag of barbecue chips. Darren was already skimming the third document, highlighter in hand, a grin spreading across his face like a man watching someone else's house of cards fall in slow motion. "She's not just overreaching," he said, tapping the paper. "She's pole vaulting into legal nonsense. She summoned me to something called an emergency conduct review panel. That's not a real thing. It had a logo. Still not a real thing." He flipped to a printout of the 2017 easement agreement, the one I'd brought to town hall, and pointed to a clause buried near the bottom. "Here, right here. Perpetual emergency access shall not be obstructed or regulated by private associations or individuals." Boom. I leaned back, letting it sink in. "So we sue?" "Not yet," Darren said, already pulling up a county zoning map on his laptop. "We go one better." A few clicks later, he pulled up a digital overlay of critical infrastructure assets. And there it was. My gate, not just listed but flagged, labeled as secondary emergency access, FEMA funded upgrade, Ridgeview Zone. "Holy hell," I muttered. "Yeah, blocking this isn't just a code violation, it's a federal violation." I stared at the screen, heart beating a little faster. Karen hadn't just overstepped. She may have committed a felony. "And if she filed that lock as an HOA security improvement," Darren said, eyes widening, "then the whole board could be liable. Obstruction of emergency infrastructure, Homeland Security level consequences." He leaned back, folded his hands behind his head, and grinned. This just turned into something very interesting. I didn't know whether to be thrilled or horrified, but one thing was crystal clear. Karen had no idea what kind of fire she'd lit. And for once, it wasn't the brush kind. Darren didn't waste time. He reached into his desk drawer, pulled out a small USB drive labeled HOA Watchdog, and handed it to me like he was sliding over state secrets. "You're going to want to see this," he said, spinning his laptop around. On screen, a folder packed with screenshots, PDFs, and saved message threads, group chats, email chains, internal HOA memos. It was like someone had vacuumed the HOA's entire digital brain and dumped it into a filing cabinet labeled "Oops." I scrolled, and then I saw it. Karen. Full digital glory, profile photo and all. A message sent just 2 days before the fire, in the HOA's private Slack channel. "We locked it. He can't prove it's a federal easement. And even if he tries, it'll take months. By then, he'll either cave or rack up so many fines he'll beg to comply." My jaw clenched. Another message popped up under hers, from someone named Jenkins, a board member. "Still need to file the paperwork, but go ahead. I'll sign off after the meeting." Darren scrolled to the next screenshot and whistled. There was Karen again. "Don't worry, I've got Jenkins on my side. He owes me for getting that patio variance pushed through. He'll rubber stamp whatever I need." I leaned back in my chair, whistling softly. She's not just entitled, she's playing Game of Thrones with lawn chairs. Darren laughed. "That's going on a t-shirt." We kept reading. Every message added a new brick to the wall of bad faith. She wasn't confused. She wasn't misinformed. She knew. She knew what the gate was. She knew what the valve did, and she still padlocked it, built a paper trail of fines, and weaponized HOA bureaucracy like it was her own little army. And the worst part? She thought no one would catch her. "This is enough," Darren said. "Enough to bury her in process violations, ethics complaints, and possible criminal obstruction. We file with zoning, with the Regional Infrastructure Office, and with the County Emergency Board. Throw the book at her, we write the book." That night, we submitted 3 official reports. One to the County Zoning Board, one to the Regional Infrastructure Authority, and one to the state's Emergency Oversight Committee. But it wasn't over yet, because the next morning I got a call. It was the fire marshal. His voice was calm, serious. "Mr. Walker," he said, "we're referring your case to state review." There was a pause. "This isn't just an HOA issue anymore." I was outside fixing a loose fence board when the first news van rolled in. Channel 5, then Channel 9, then a radio station crew with a mic the size of a baguette and a cameraman who looked entirely too excited for rural coverage. Apparently someone, maybe someone who enjoys blueprints and poetic justice, had leaked the HOA messages to the press. By noon, it was everywhere. HOA board member blocks emergency valve during wildfire. Local woman denies fire access over visual standards. Karen, clipboard, chaos. The footage from the town hall meeting looped on every local network. Karen sitting smug in her chair. The fire crew's blank stares. Me rolling out the blueprint. Every time her voice came on, I was simply protecting the visual harmony of the community. It felt like satire, but then social media got involved. Memes, so many memes. One showed Karen's face photoshopped onto a medieval castle gate with the caption, "None shall pass unless HOA approved." Another had her lawn chair on fire with firefighters helplessly watching from behind a padlocked gate. Rosie sent me a TikTok of a dramatic reenactment done entirely with Barbies. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. And just when it seemed like it couldn't get any weirder, Karen went live. There she was, sitting in her manicured backyard, framed just right. Tasteful fountain in the background, pastel hydrangeas on either side, wine glass in hand. Voice soft, controlled. I only did what I believed was necessary to preserve the integrity and safety of our neighborhood. At no point was I informed of the gate's critical status. The media is creating a false narrative. I'm not the villain here. I'm a concerned citizen. I nearly choked on my sandwich. An hour later, Rosie sent me a clip with the caption, "She just said the gate was a community hazard." The reaction was instant. Homeowners who had kept their heads down for months now saw exactly what unchecked power and bad intentions looked like. A woman named Denise, whom I'd never even met, started a petition to remove Karen from the HOA board. It got 200 signatures in 6 hours. And while the town rallied, the fire marshal held a press conference. He stood at a podium, firm and direct. "We are officially classifying the obstruction of the Ridgeview emergency valve as a breach of state emergency response protocol." Behind him, a giant red map displayed a glowing arrow, pointing directly to Karen's property. The fallout had begun, and this time not even her clipboard could block it. The official notice came on a Thursday, printed in HOA blue ink, and slid under every door like a passive-aggressive invitation to revolution. Special board meeting. Emergency vote to review the position of board member Karen Travers. No one said her name out loud, but we all knew. The town had shifted. People who used to wave politely and whisper behind hedges were now organizing group chats, comparing infractions, forwarding HOA newsletters like crime scene exhibits. For the first time in years, neighbors were talking, not about lawn treatments or recycling days, but about her. I got the call from Councilman Devers that morning. "We'd like you to speak," he said. "You're the only one who knows all the moving parts, the infrastructure, the emails, the history." I agreed. Not for the spotlight, not even for revenge, but because someone had to say it out loud. That evening, the community center overflowed. Folding chairs multiplied like rabbits. People stood shoulder to shoulder in the hall. Firefighters came in uniform. The mayor brought his own seat. And Karen? She sat dead center again. Same clipboard, same pantsuit, but this time the smugness had cracked, just a little. You could see it in how tightly she clutched her pen, how her eyes scanned every whisper like they were insults aimed at her soul. The board opened the floor. I stepped up, holding a rolled blueprint in one hand and a small folder in the other. Not for drama, just for truth. I told them everything, the lock, the chain, the valve, the fire, the emails, the lies. I didn't embellish, didn't need to. The facts were damning enough. I finished with the words I'd been holding in since that night at the gate. This wasn't about property lines, or rules, or aesthetics. This was about control, about a person who decided her authority mattered more than our safety. And someone has to be accountable for that. There was silence, then murmurs, then applause, slow, deliberate, growing. Karen raised her hand to speak, but the mayor gently lowered it with a shake of his head. We've heard enough. And then they voted. It wasn't even close. Karen was removed from the HOA board, effective immediately. As I walked back to my seat, I caught one last glimpse of her, walking out the door, clipboard hanging at her side like a broken sword. She didn't look angry. She looked lost, like someone who built a fortress out of rules and never expected it to fall. The week after Karen's removal felt like breathing fresh air after months of holding your breath. The change wasn't loud or dramatic. It was subtle, almost suspiciously peaceful. Neighbors started waving again. Kids returned to the cul-de-sac, bikes zigzagging freely across the asphalt without fear of visual obstruction citations. No anonymous warnings taped to mailboxes. No early morning snapshots of non-compliant patio furniture. Just normal. The HOA board moved fast, probably trying to prove they still had a pulse. They appointed an interim president, Mike Hutchins, a retired ship captain who wore flip-flops to meetings and referred to bylaws as those crusty papers nobody reads. I liked him immediately. We met at the gate 3 days later. It looked different now. Cleaned, cleared, the burn marks were gone. The broken lock replaced with a small digital panel that blinked with quiet authority. The fire department had installed a smart lock override tied directly to their dispatch system. No more keys, no more padlocks, just clean access. Every time. Mike handed me a folded letter. From the board, he said, and well, from us. It wasn't just an apology, it was an acknowledgement that the gate had always been a community lifeline, that obstructing it had nearly cost lives, and that the HOA, under Karen's leadership, had failed. They were also reimbursing me for damages, covering the upgrade, and offering something I hadn't expected, a title, Community Safety Liaison. It was ceremonial, no vote, no clipboard, but a seat at the table, a voice in future safety decisions. I almost said no. After everything, who would blame me? But then I thought about Jake barking that first day, about the fire truck slamming to a stop, about Karen in her bathrobe sipping wine while the hills burned, and I realized if I don't take that seat, someone like her eventually will. So I accepted. The next weekend, the fire department hosted a community safety drill. I figured it'd be a sleepy affair, a folding table, a whistle, maybe some juice boxes. Instead, it felt like a block party. Trucks rolled in. Volunteers handed out snow cones. Kids climbed into fire engines. Adults asked real questions, and somewhere near the back of the crowd I saw her, Karen, wide-brimmed hat, big sunglasses, no clipboard. She didn't say a word, didn't make a scene. She just stood there, watching the smart lock blink like a lighthouse. Then quietly, she turned and walked away. And for the first time since this all began, she didn't look back. A month after the fire, the county organized a public appreciation event. It wasn't grand. No big stage, no marching band, no fireworks, just a patch of grass in the park, a few rows of folding chairs, some volunteers in printed t-shirts, and the steady buzz of conversation from people who'd lived through something together. When my name was called, I hesitated. I'm not big on speeches. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy with a gait, a truck, and a low tolerance for nonsense. But I walked up anyway. Faces looked up. Familiar ones. Rosie, Devers, Mike, Darren, grinning behind a pair of crooked sunglasses, even a few firefighters I didn't know by name, but definitely by what they did that night. I stood behind the microphone and said something simple, something I hadn't rehearsed. One lock can stop water. One voice can stop that lock. So speak up, even if your voice is the first one. There was a pause, then applause. Not thunderous, but real, earned. I stepped off the stage, shook a few hands, and faded back into the crowd. After that, life did what it always does. It moved on. Karen mostly disappeared. Rumor had it she tried to start a private neighborhood improvement group, but no one joined. People had seen too much, trusted too little. She still walks her little dog around the block, still wears those oversized sunglasses like armor. But now she crosses the street when she sees me, not out of fear, out of silence. And that's enough. The HOA meetings are calmer now. Mike chairs them with the grace of a man who's weathered storms on the actual sea, and I sit near the end of the table. No voting power, just a voice. And for once, that's all I need. We updated the emergency plans, installed fire-resistant landscaping around the common areas, even added a second valve farther out, away from any HOA oversight, just in case. But the original gate, it still stands. Clean, unlocked, quiet. Sometimes I pass it on my way out in the morning, coffee in hand, dog at my side. The smart lock blinks softly, a reminder that the world doesn't have to be loud to be strong. And there, just below the panel, is a faint scratch in the metal, the last scar left by Karen's padlock. I thought about painting over it once, but I didn't, because that scratch tells a whole story about fire, control, resistance, and a town that remembered what mattered just in time. So now I've told you how it went down, the gate, the fire, the chain, and the woman who thought a padlock could outrank common sense. But here's what I keep wondering. What would you have done? If it were your gate, your land, your town on the line, would you have waited? Would you have fought back? Or would you have cut through the chain just like I did? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading, because sometimes all it takes is one voice to turn the tide.